Jenkins, Swarbrick, the Fighting Irish, they're speaking their minds. They're trying to slow down the revolution that's happening in college sports and in college football. And an update from the Big 12, Brett Yormark planting the Big 12 flag in the middle of Rucker Park, the state of New York. And an update with the Pac-12 meeting negotiations. Wow. Welcome to episode 173 of College Football's Peek Around the Corner with your host, Greg Pflugar. We cover everything in college football because we love everything in college football. And if you do as well, please subscribe to our channel, smash the like button, share the video with your family and friends. We can't waste any more time because this is a stacked show. Episode 173. Let's hit the Notre Dame story. This does not surprise us in the least. As you all know, go all the way back to August 10th, 2022, episode number 1, our manifesto. We talked about all this, NIL, student athletes becoming employees, and we followed that episode up with many others talking about how the walls are closing in on Notre Dame. Yes, I agree with a lot of what Jack Swarbrick said in this article. Okay? But I also disagree. Student athletes will become employees, and this will not only change college football, college sports, but it is going to change Notre Dame's ability to stay football independent. Let's get to the article. Notre Dame's athletic director says NCAA could break apart without stronger NIL guidelines. Ross Dellinger of Sports Illustrated. Without resolutions to name, image, and likeness from itself, Congress, and professional sports, the NCAA is in jeopardy of eventually breaking apart, says Notre Dame athletic director Jack Swarbrick. In an op-ed in the New York Times, as well as an interview with Sports Illustrated, Swarbrick painted a stark picture of the future of college athletics if NIL continues to evolve without governance and college athletes are deemed employees, something he expects to happen in the coming months. College athletics is in crisis, Swarbrick and Notre Dame president John Jenkins write in the Times, the New York Times. Despite many of his colleagues petitioning for significant congressional intervention, Swarbrick and Jenkins call for an only limited federal legislation. They say that Congress should rule that college athletes are not employees, preemptive differing state NIL laws, and allow college athletics to create NIL rules for the sake of competitive equity. That's the money shot, competitive equity. We're going to come back around to that. They also believe the NFL should create a minor league for young players. Not happening. And that NBA should eliminate the one and done rule. Swarbrick and Jenkins also write that the NCAA and its member schools should establish more stringent rules to police NIL endeavors. That should happen. And it can happen without any other legislation. Without such legislation enforcement, Swarbrick suggests to Sports Illustrated that the years-long splintering of the association will reach extremes, which rich, like-minded college programs breaking away. If we can't start to get ourselves to where we can make rational decisions like those and enforce them, the future will be more than one athletic association. I can tell you that, he says. We've got to get our act together as college athletics and do the things we can do. We keep sort of implying we can't address name, image, and likeness. Of course we can, Swarbrick continues. We can do it in ways requiring reporting on transactions, requiring that there be transactions. We have to take that on as opposed to looking to others to fix it for us. In a view shared by many within the industry, Swarbrick expressed his intentions on protecting the century-old educational mission of college athletics, which, at its highest level, is drifting toward a professional model where boosters and boosters-led collectives are distributing salaries to players under the guise of NIL. The evolution of NIL has created an unregulated free agency and false market where college athletes are signing 5, 6, and even 7-year figure contracts to play for certain schools administrator says. One of the most respected in the field, Swarbrick, a former attorney, outlined a host of solutions to repair what he says is a broken system that threatens the competitive equity of college sports. Again, we get back to the competitive equity. We're going to get back to it once we're done with this article. We're not going to go through the whole article. That starts with the NCAA creating NIL policies as opposed to the current guidelines and enforcing those policies. Athletes should be required to report all NIL transactions to the school, he says, and it should be the school's obligation to ensure that any transaction between an athlete, recruit, and a booster is in fact a transaction which the athlete contributes NIL value and compensation reflects reasonable market value. That last part, okay, the Supreme Court has already basically ruled that a student athlete has to be treated the exact same way as a student when it comes to NIL. So every student in that university that does an NIL, name, image, and likeness deal, will they have to report this to the university? Among Swarbrick and Jenkins' other suggestions in the op-ed, the NCAA should also establish a national class miss policy that limits each team's travel schedule to avoid missing too many classes. Number 2, create a national medical trust fund for those injured while playing college sports. I agree with that. Number 3, honor scholarships for athletes who wish to return to school to complete their degree. Swarbrick tells the Sports Illustrated these rules will not solve the entire problem, but are a start to regulating an unwieldy system of blatant recruiting inducements. I agree with that. We've talked about it here at Peek Around the Corner. NIL being used as a recruiting inducement is going to crush the game that we love. Any regulation around that, I agree with here at Peek Around the Corner. No question about it. However, student athletes becoming employees, signing a contract, takes away all those issues. And we'll get back to that. People are paying under the table for as long as I've been around, he says. Now it's the same payment, but they're calling it NIL. We're not going to stop it. It's not going to go all the way, but we've got to get out of this position where the vast majority of the transactions occurring are not what they are being characterized as. Educational institutions ought to be embarrassed to be a part of it. We're going to conduct a fraud here. While some school collectives are dispersing millions to athletic teams, most notably football and basketball players, other programs either don't have deep enough donor resources or are choosing not to take part in what's becoming a bidding war for talent. NIL spending is creating division among schools, Swarbrick says, a divide that could ultimately lead to a breakaway. There's a lot of things that could lead to a breakaway. NIL and the vast difference in media revenue money that's going to the schools, as we're seeing here in the next few years. Back to the article. A breakaway of the Power 5 programs, or a portion of them, has been a long discussed possibility that has gathered more momentum in this NIL era, swelling with resources and deep donor pockets. The Big Ten and the SEC have separated themselves from much of college football. A Big Ten with USC and UCLA and an SEC with Oklahoma and Texas collectively have arguably 15 of the top 20 brands in the sport, most of them towering financially over the other programs in the FBS. Now, we're going to skip part of the article. We're going to the employee section, where Swarbrick does not want student athletes to become employees. You're going to have administrative tribunals and courts in the coming months declare student athletes in certain cases employees, Swarbrick says. We are most concerned about that development and its implications for our students. The students I talk to generally don't want to be classified as employees. While that may be, the National College Players Association, including NCAA athletes, are leading a movement for more compensation for athletes in light of the ballooning coaching salaries and skyrocketing television contracts. More than a dozen football coaches now make at least $8 million in salary, and the Big Ten recently signed a new media rights contract worth more than $1 billion a year. And finally, in this article, and if you want to read the whole article, we'll have a link in the description box. below the video. The NCAA, in fact, is backing a California bill that would require its state colleges to share revenue with athletes. The bill faces its first big test next month when it's up for a vote in the California Assembly Higher Education Committee. That is a terrible bill. We don't have time. We talked about it in an episode long ago. We're going to have to do it again. This bill is horrible, but I'm not going to have time to go through it in this episode, episode 173. There was a lot to unpack there, but basically Swarbrick and Notre Dame want to have NIL regulated. They want to have some federal oversight on this, some federal targeted bill to help them out in regulating this. However, I agree. Most people agree. The inducement part, being able to poach a player without that player going into the transfer portal first, to have inducements for collectives to go and recruit players on other teams, that is doing great harm to the sport. But the Supreme Court has already ruled student athlete cannot be treated any different than a regular student for name, image, and likeness. A student that goes on a YouTube channel, just for one example, and teaches other people how to play the violin. The rules, university rules set with that person, that student, has to be the same for the student athletes. So remember that. Now, I do think at some point, student athletes become employees. We've been saying that since episode 1. Jack Swarbrick predicted it here. We've covered the NCAA versus Johnson. It's going to happen at some point. There needs to be a collective bargaining agreement, somebody representing the student athletes, someone representing the conference and or schools or both, and have a CBA where the players, the student athletes, have some protection, medical protections, right, in their agreement. And they also have to sign a contract with the university or with a third party that represents the university, a quasi-employer status. At some point, the student athletes are going to become employees. And that will take rid of some of these issues in regards to other schools being able to poach other players. Those student athletes will have to sign a 1, 2, 3-year contract, 4-year contract, 5-year contract, whatever the agreement is between the player and the school or whoever is representing the school. That is a solution. Now, I know the student athletes becoming employees also bring up some difficult questions. A student athlete, a kicker misses 3 kicks in a game. Can that kicker be released? Can he get fired? Can he just be let go and then suddenly he doesn't have a scholarship? Those will need to be answered. Those need to be part of the CBA. Representation, student athletes, representation of the conference and schools. Let's get to it. Let's get to the future sooner rather than later, because that's where we're heading down. And for Notre Dame, I understand all their concerns because the super conferences can provide more compensations to the student athletes than Notre Dame will ever be able to do here going into the future. And we've talked about that since episode number 1. We didn't wait until March 23rd, 24th of 2023. We've been talking about that since day 1. We have been consistently reporting to you all that the walls are closing in on Notre Dame. Change is happening, and the way they do business now will not be able to keep up. So that's also a big story in all of this. This is why Swarbrick, this is why Jenkins talked to the New York Times, been talking to Sports Illustrated about all these issues. Put down your thoughts and comments in the comment section below the video. Now let's get to Brett Yormark. My goodness. Every single day there's an announcement. Big 12 to partner with Rucker Park, hopes to host exhibition games on court. Max Olson of The Athletic. The Big 12 will announce Thursday. It is partnering with Rucker Park to launch a series of youth clinics featuring its head basketball coaches in Harlem this summer and hopes to host exhibition games on the famed playground court in 2024, a conference source told The Athletic. The conference will make the announcement in advance of the Kansas State taking on Michigan State at Madison Square Garden in New York on Thursday for a spot in the Elite Eight. The Wildcats have 4 New York City natives on their team, led by point guard Marquise Noel and forward Tomlin. This is Unbelievable timing, unbelievable marketing by Brett Yormark to make this announcement right before Kansas State plays in New York. Back to the article. Big 12 Commissioner Brett Yormark, who was the CEO of the Brooklyn Nets from 2005 to 2019, is partnering with New York City Parks on the program. Yormark has said he's determined to grow his league's footprint to become a more national conference and embrace its status as arguably the top college basketball conference in the country. The strength of this conference in basketball, I think, is unrivaled, Yormark said earlier this month. And finally, we're not going to go through the whole article. We skipped some of it. We'll provide a link in the description box. What does this mean for the Big 12? While the Big 12 efforts to expand into the West Coast by adding Pac-12 schools have garnered much attention since Yormark was hired last July, he's serious about trying to make the Big 12 a truly national brand. This is a logical first step to plant a flag in New York City. Given his background in the market in pro basketball, expect to see more new ideas like this going forward. It's worth noting Kansas City is locked into host the Big 12 basketball tournaments through 2027, but Yormark wants to bolster the conference East Coast presence. And he doesn't necessarily need to expand or relocate its tournaments to do so. Those are all great points. He doesn't necessarily need to expand into New York. Doesn't necessarily need to move a tournament into New York. Although I think he will move a tournament. Now, when it comes to Big 12 expansion, we know the story, right? Big 12 trying to get some Pac-12 schools. And we've also heard that Gonzaga is most likely going to become a member of the Big 12 basketball and bring all the other sports into the Big 12. Because Brett Yormark decided that the strength of his conference could be a national conference, all the way from the East Coast, all the way to the West Coast, provide the greatest bandwidth value for their current media partners, Fox and ESPN. He recognized all of this. Brett Yormark recognized the change in the media market. It's turning into a recession, so he struck a deal early, a media deal early with Fox and ESPN. He recognizes the growing value potential of basketball because, well, let's face it, there may be a breakaway in the future. We do not know, but at least there's a possibility of Brett Yormark separating his basketball content with his football content. He may be able to juice up the value of basketball. We'll see what happens in 5, 6, 7 years. But Yormark has a vision. He has a plan. He's planning the Big 12 flag in New York City, much like what the Big 10 did somewhat with Rutgers when it comes to football. Try to get to the East Coast, the media market of New York City. So people up in New York City, New York, will talk about Big 12, Big 12, Big 12. It's marketing, it's branding, it's selling, and eventually it's closing on the deal. That's what Brett Yormark is doing. Now, Pac-12 update, media update. Can George Kliavkoff close on a media deal with some media companies to get the 10 Pac-12 presidents on board? What is the update? Well, there really isn't an update. It really is not an update. Yesterday was a nothing. Our source, Arizona State Money Perch, has been nailing this story from the beginning, was those numbers presented just weren't all that real. They were not real. They just weren't real. That's the story. Once again, the Pac-12 presidents really don't have an idea of what their media package is going to look like because George Kliavkoff is still trying to create an offer, a comprehensive plan to present in front of the Pac-12 presidents that they can sign. But he's still scrambling. In this late hour, he's still scrambling. Why do I say it's in this late hour? You know, we believe at Peek Around the Corner that this may not be a self-imposed deadline, that this could very well be a deadline of April 15th. Maybe some of it is self-imposed. Maybe the University of Arizona President Robbins says April 15th and that's it. But I got a feel, well, not a feeling, we got some steam here. That they're like Amazon, they're not going to wait around forever. They could walk away from all of this here in the next couple weeks. And then that leaves even less opportunities for George Kliavkoff to carve out a true comprehensive media package. Fox, they're out, reported by Brett McMurphy. At this point, they're out. They're not negotiating with the Pac-12. Reported by Brett McMurphy. Reported by Andrew Michon. Reported by Dennis Dodd. ESPN, not close to a deal. Reported by Andrew Michon. This stuff is real. The scramble is real. They're scrambling behind the scenes. The sources are overflowing with uneasiness about what's going on today in the Pac-12 here on March 23rd. All of it is real. None of it is made up. So that's the update. There is no update. It is the same as it ever was. It's the same as it was last week, the week before that, the week before that. They do not have a deal right now with all the presidents to sign on board, to sign the grant of rights to get this thing done. The deal is not there yet. So stick with us here at Peek Around the Corner as we cover that story. Rucker Park, spring football coming up. Spring is in the air. Even today in Minnesota, we can feel the spring, smell it. The sun is actually out today. So hang with us here at Peek Around the Corner. Can't wait for spring football. So excited. So until next time, from all of us here at PATC to all of you, please, you all take great care of each other. Thank you so very much.